The sun was dying behind the dusty hills, casting long shadows over the silent town. A rugged, lonely cowboy rode slowly along the empty street, his hat low, eyes scanning for anything unusual. Suddenly, he spotted a frail widow clutching her young daughter, standing frozen in front of a broken-down house that seemed ready to collapse. The wind whispered through the cracks, carrying the girl's quiet sobs, and the mother's desperate whisper barely reached him. "We have nowhere to go." The cowboy's heart tightened. He had spent years wandering, avoiding ties, but something in that moment pulled him in, a strange, unexplainable tug. The town's distant rumors of danger and mistrust hung in the air, but he ignored them. Danger, loneliness, and hope collided in that silent, sunlit street. He knew that a single decision tonight could change all their lives, for the cowboy had always been a wanderer, roaming dusty trails and lonely plains, hiding the ache in his heart that yearned for connection. Years of solitude had made him strong, but also painfully aware of what he lacked: warmth, family, someone to care for. The widow's struggles were raw and visible. Her worn clothes, empty hands, and the frightened look in her daughter's eyes told a story the town whispered about but never helped with. He watched them quietly, his chest tightening as he imagined the nights they had spent shivering in the cold, judged by strangers who turned away. Then, without a word, he offered a bed in his cabin, his voice steady yet kind. But the moment held a shocking twist. The offer was for both mother and child. Their eyes met, hesitation and hope tangled together, and the air thrummed with unspoken possibilities. The widow's eyes lingered on the cowboy's cabin as the first chill of evening crept over the town, her heart pounding with fear and curiosity. And though the offer promised shelter, every instinct screamed caution, because the town had already begun whispering behind closed doors, spreading rumors of impropriety and scandal. Their words like invisible daggers that seemed to follow her with every step. Yet she could not deny the undeniable pull she felt toward the stranger who had extended his hand when no one else had. And her daughter clutched her skirt nervously, sensing her mother's uncertainty, while the cowboy stood a few paces away, silent yet alert, aware of the invisible gaze of neighbors and townsfolk who lingered on porches and behind shutters, judging, questioning, and gossiping. And he felt the weight of every rumor pressing down on his broad shoulders, yet he refused to back down, because he knew that protecting them was more important than the whispers of people who had never truly understood loneliness or loss. And as he opened the door to his modest cabin, the warm glow of the fire spilling out into the cold evening offered a brief reprieve from the town's scrutiny, but tension lingered like a shadow, stretching into every corner of the room, as the widow hesitated at the threshold, torn between the instinct to flee to safety and the fear of trusting a man whose past was a mystery. And she glanced at her daughter, whose wide eyes reflected both hope and fear, and the cowboy's gaze softened, steadying her with a quiet strength that seemed to promise protection without conditions. Yet in that moment, the air itself seemed charged with possibility and danger simultaneously, the creaking boards of the cabin underfoot echoing the unspoken uncertainty that bound them together, while outside, the wind howled through the empty streets, carrying the murmurs of neighbors and the scent of dust and smoke. And every step they took into the cabin felt like a step away from judgment, but also deeper into vulnerability, each heartbeat heavy with questions that had no immediate answers. And as the widow set her daughter down by the fire, the cowboy offered a small, reassuring smile, trying to ease the tension that filled the room like a tangible presence. And though words were few, the silence spoke volumes, a mixture of fear, longing, and unspoken agreement that they would face whatever came together, even if the town never understood. And as shadows danced across the walls from the flickering firelight, their eyes met once more, a silent acknowledgement of trust forming amidst uncertainty. The room itself a fragile bubble against the storm of rumors and judgment outside. And in that fragile bubble, the widow felt a strange courage blooming, a decision forming in her heart to take the risk, to step beyond fear and allow herself and her daughter a chance at safety, warmth, and perhaps something more, while the cowboy quietly prepared a corner of the cabin, aware of the fragility of the trust being built and determined that no external threat, no whisper of scandal, and no shadow of past loneliness would break the fragile bond forming that night. because he knew that some risks were worth taking and some connections, however uncertain, were worth protecting with every ounce of strength and courage he possessed. The night had settled like a heavy blanket over the town, but the calm was deceptive, and without warning, dark clouds gathered rapidly above the hills, turning the sky an ominous gray as thunder rumbled low in the distance and lightning split the heavens, flashing over the dusty roads and illuminating the cabin in stark, fleeting bursts, while the wind began to howl like a living thing, rattling the shutters and bending the few trees outside, as if testing their resilience. And the widow's heart raced with each crack of thunder, gripping her daughter tightly, who trembled in fear and sought shelter behind her mother's skirt, her small hands shaking as the first drops of rain hit the roof with a fierce intensity, pounding like an army against the old wood. And then, almost impossibly, the distant cries of wild animals pierced through the storm, howls and shrieks of creatures drawn near by the storm and the scent of vulnerability, circling the cabin in a way that made the air tense with immediate danger. And the cowboy moved swiftly, his eyes sharp, muscles taut, and every instinct screaming that he must protect them at all costs. As he barricaded the door and checked the windows, his presence a steady anchor in the chaos, and the widow, hidden by the doorway, watched him in awe and fear, seeing for the first time the depth of his courage and the truth of his heart, how he risked himself without hesitation, how his calm control seemed to push back the storm and the invisible predators outside, and each lightning flash revealed the terror in her daughter's wide eyes. Yet in those same flashes, she also saw a flicker of hope reflected in the cowboy's determined gaze, a promise unspoken but understood that no harm would come to them while he stood between the danger and their fragile lives. And as the wind tore through the trees and rain splashed the ground in sheets, the cabin itself groaning under the assault, the widow's fear turned to a mixture of awe and gratitude, realizing that this man who had once been a stranger now carried the weight of their safety on his shoulders. And the daughter clutched his coat, tiny hands seeking reassurance, while he knelt beside her, murmuring words meant to calm her trembling. Even as the storm raged and the animals prowled at the edges of their vision, and every thump on the roof, every snap of a branch, every howl became a test of faith and endurance. And through it all, the widow's emotions surged, a blend of terror, relief, and a dawning understanding of trust, love, and protection. And by the time the storm began to relent, the cabin still standing but the night marked with chaos, the widow held her daughter close, tears streaming down her face as she whispered a silent gratitude, and the cowboy, exhausted yet vigilant, glanced at them both, his expression revealing a quiet triumph not just over the storm, but over the fears that had threatened to keep them apart. And in that electric, storm-soaked night, bonds were solidified, hearts were laid bare, and the first true sense of family and safety blossomed in the flickering shadows. A fragile yet unbreakable connection forged under fire, wind, and relentless rain that promised they would face every challenge together. No matter how fierce or terrifying the world outside became, as the storm finally began to subside, leaving a trail of wet earth and battered trees. A sudden crash outside the cabin shattered any remaining calm as a huge branch, loosened by the wind, threatened to break through the fragile roof, sending splinters flying across the room and forcing the widow and her daughter to scream in panic. And without a second thought, the cowboy lunged forward, strong arms catching the debris just in time, his body bracing against the impact, muscles straining, sweat and rain mixing on his forehead, eyes sharp and focused. And in that heartbeat, the widow saw not a rugged stranger, but a man whose every action screamed selflessness and courage, someone willing to risk life and limb for those he barely knew, while her daughter clung to her mother, eyes wide with awe and fear, witnessing the raw strength and determination of the man who had promised them safety. And as the danger passed, the cowboy helped them both back to their feet, brushing splinters from their hair and clothing, and his gaze held hers for a long moment, silent but speaking volumes, a communication of protection, care, and unwavering commitment. And the widow's chest tightened with emotion as realization dawned that this was no ordinary offer of shelter. It was a pledge of family, of stability, of hope in a world that had so often shown them cruelty. And each glance exchanged, each tremor in their hands, and each measured breath became a rhythm of trust forming between them, as if the storm had not just battered the land outside, but also broken down the walls within their hearts, leaving space for connection that was both fragile and profound. And when the wind finally retreated entirely, leaving only the gentle patter of rain on the roof, the cowboy gathered their soaked blankets and lit the fire anew, the warm glow illuminating the relief and gratitude etched on their faces, and the widow, feeling an unspoken safety, let herself relax for the first time in weeks, her shoulders easing, eyes softening, and the daughter curled into the cowboy's side, sensing the solid presence of someone who would shield them from harm. While outside, the town remained oblivious to the bravery displayed, their whispers and judgment rendered meaningless in the face of the bond forged in the crucible of danger. And as the night deepened, the three sat together, the crackling fire casting flickering shadows across their intertwined forms. And in that silent, charged atmosphere, the widow felt an overwhelming surge of emotion, gratitude blending with awe and a cautious hope for the future, understanding fully that this man, once a stranger on a dusty street, had become their protector, their anchor, and perhaps, in time, the heart of a family they had never dared to dream of. And with every small gesture, the handing of a warm cup, a gentle glance, the steadying of trembling hands, the cowboy's selfless nature was written clearly in action, leaving no doubt in the widow's mind that safety, care, and love were no longer distant ideals but tangible truths present in the rugged warmth of his arms and the steadfast resolve in his eyes. And as the night stretched on, tension finally easing into quiet comfort, the intensity of the near misses and emotional exchanges settled into a powerful, unspoken understanding. Their lives were forever changed, their bond unbreakable, and every choice he made had proven that courage, protection, and family were intertwined, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring. Together, morning light filtered softly through the cabin windows, illuminating the small space where the widow, her daughter, and the cowboy now shared a quiet, unspoken rhythm. And outside, the town slowly began to notice the subtle changes that had taken root, whispers turning from suspicion to admiration as neighbors glimpsed the gentle interactions and protective gestures that defined their bond. And the widow, once tense and guarded, now moved with a sense of cautious ease, arranging the cabin with small touches of warmth. Laughter returning to her voice in moments when her daughter asked questions or pointed out the flowers beginning to bloom outside, while the young girl explored the corners of the cabin with growing confidence, her trust in the cowboy evident in the way she ran to his side when startled or simply sought reassurance with a small hand on his arm. And the cowboy, shedding the image of a solitary wanderer, revealed layers of vulnerability and care that had been hidden beneath rugged strength for years, allowing the widow to see the depth of his character in every shared glance and wordless exchange. From the way he refilled the kettle on the stove to the way he paused in the doorway to ensure their safety before stepping outside to check the fences or the garden. And each act, no matter how small, spoke louder than any words could, transforming their shared space into a home rather than a temporary refuge. And as the days passed, the town's judgmental eyes softened into curiosity and eventually respect, with neighbors stopping to offer help, children lingering nearby to watch the small family move with quiet determination. And the widow began to recognize that the very man who had been a stranger a week ago had become an anchor in her life, a protector whose care was steady, patient, and unwavering. And the cowboy's own heart, long accustomed to solitude, warmed with a new sense of purpose and belonging, the weight of loneliness easing as he realized that the connections forming between them were genuine and enduring. And in moments of shared silence by the fire, preparing meals together, or watching the sunset from the porch, each of them felt the profound shift from fear to security, from isolation to the gentle rhythm of trust. And while small challenges still arose, a broken fence, a leaking roof, or the occasional skeptical glance from a neighbor, the three faced them together, their combined courage and resilience evident in every action, every protective instinct, every tender smile. And in that unfolding harmony, the widow understood fully that home was no longer just a building, but a place defined by love, safety, and shared hope. And the daughter, laughing freely as she ran through the small yard, reflected the transformation in the adults' hearts. The cowboy's steady presence giving her the confidence to explore and the courage to believe in kindness and care. And as evening fell and the fire crackled softly, casting warm light over their intertwined forms, it became clear that the bond forged through fear, risk, and unwavering commitment had now blossomed into something lasting, something unshakable, and the emotional resolution that had begun in a stormy night of danger now settled fully, gentle and profound, leaving the three of them not just safe but connected, each heart attuned to the other's, each life enriched by courage, trust, and the promise of shared tomorrows. The widow sank into the warmth of the cabin, her daughter, curled in her arms, and for the first time in months, fear and loneliness melted into a quiet, trembling peace, while the cowboy, standing nearby, watched them with a gentle pride, his rugged exterior softened by the depth of care he felt for them both. And every corner of the cabin seemed alive with the laughter, trust, and love that had replaced silence and uncertainty, as if the walls themselves recognized the miracle of connection. And the widow's heart swelled with gratitude, realizing that home was no longer just a roof or a bed, but the presence of someone willing to protect and cherish them unconditionally. And the daughter's eyes sparkled with joy and belonging. And as the fire flickered softly across their faces, the cowboy whispered, almost to himself, "Sometimes, the greatest home is found in unexpected hearts." And in that simple truth, the story of fear, struggle, courage, and love settled into lasting memory, leaving the audience inspired, emotional, and certain that hope and family can appear where least expected.